Hi, I'm Fintan Nutunaptubua, and I'm a Pacific climate warrior, and I'm in the stream.
Hi, I'm Ahmed Shabuddin, and you're in the stream, now live on YouTube. Today, oceans polluted with plastic. How is our addiction to convenient throwaway plastics harming the environment? We'll speak to activists working to clean things up. A new study has found that the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, which is a slurry of plastic trash in the waters between Hawaii and California, is up to 16 times bigger than previously thought, covering an area 3 times the size of France. Now, the area was created by ocean currents that collect trash and broken down remnants of plastic waste called microplastics. And it's not the only part of the ocean that's suffering. An estimated 8 million tons of plastic waste end up in our oceans each year. That's according to the United Nations Environment Program. And if nothing is done to address the problem, well, by 2050, the amount of marine plastic waste could surpass the total weight of fish in the ocean. Think about that. So what should be done to address marine plastic pollution? Well, joining me to discuss this from Delft in the Netherlands, we have Laurent Le Breton, an oceanographer with the Ocean Cleanup. That organization plans to launch the first cleanup effort into the Great Pacific Garbage Patch later this year. In Los Angeles, Marcus Erickson, he is co-founder of the Five Gyres Institute and is its director of research. We also have Isabel Wyson, co-founder of the Bye Bye Plastic Bags Initiative in Bali, Indonesia, joining us. And last but not least, in San Francisco, Shilpi Chotre, senior communications officer with Break Free from Plastic. That's a global movement to stop plastic pollution. Welcome to you all for an important conversation. Laurent, I want to start with this study, right? You authored the latest study of the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. It's the most dense accumulation of ocean plastic in the entire world. Is this just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to plastic pollution?
Yes, I think it is. It's noticeable, but it's the highest, greatest accumulation zone for floating plastic in the ocean. Now, there's a lot of plastic still missing. We don't really know where all the plastic that is coming into the ocean is. So there's probably the seabed, but we find plastic everywhere. But the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, as we call it, is the largest accumulation zone for buoyant plastic.
And Marcus, you know, with that in mind, I mean, is there a misconception when we think about solving this problem? What would you say is the biggest misconception? Okay, I'm struggling to hear Marcus, which makes me wonder if anybody else can hear Marcus. In the meantime, Shilpi, anything that you can add about what you think is the biggest misconception? Oh, wait, Marcus had muted himself. I'm going to go to him, then we'll come to you, Shilpi.
Yes,
Marcus,
yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. So what I was going to say is that, yes, one of the biggest misconceptions that there are these islands of plastic trash floating in the oceans. That was a myth that began by a lot of conflicting stories maybe 10, 15 years ago. What we understand now is that most of the plastic out there are small particles by count, and they're far and wide. And the better analogy, instead of an island, is more like a smog of small particles, much the way we saw smog in our skies over big cities today. And that has pushed the cleanup efforts to be more on land rather than at sea. So that misconception of islands of trash is a myth that we had busted long ago.
Well, you know, Shilpi, I know Shilpi, I want to come to you next, but before I do, we actually have someone named Shilpa, very closely maybe related to you, but no, in all seriousness, she's chiming in with what she thinks is the biggest misconception, saying, firstly, people are not aware of the harm that it causes. In fact, it took a long time for me to learn, but after I learned, I'm slowly trying to eliminate it. That's her use of plastic. That said, there's resistance to change. I can see in my building, people do not segregate waste, despite governments mandating it. How big is this problem, and what is that biggest misconception? Do you agree with what Marcus said?
I fully agree with Marcus said, and I think it's a great observation from Shilpa as well. I want to say that plastic pollution is not just a marine litter issue. In fact, that's only the most visible part of the problem. We know one of the major ramifications is ocean dumping, but plastic pollutes during the entire course of its life cycle, from extraction to production to disposal. I also think it's worth mentioning industry often promotes solutions like burning plastic waste, also known as incineration or waste to energy. not a viable solution. So plastic is then merely transformed into a more formidable form of toxic pollution, and it has grave health impacts for nearby communities. So Break Free from Plastic is looking at the problems and solutions at a very holistic level.
Well, Shilpi, with that in mind, I want to ask what we don't know. Obviously you guys are very well informed. That's why you're here joining us. But it seems in doing the research, like there's a lot that we actually still don't know. How is this, for example, impacting our food systems? And I wonder if that maybe, if you look at this Guardian article, it kind of draws attention to this question. This came out today. It says the plastics crisis is more urgent than you know. Recycling bottles won't fix it. And then in small print there, it says a deposit scheme for bottles won't make a scrap of difference. This stuff is in our food, our clothes, and in us. What do you make of that, Shilpi?
I think that's a great, question. I want to address the extent of plastics recycling towards the ocean pollution problem. Simply, this crisis cannot be solved with recycling. Based on a recent study from the University of Georgia, actually, only 9% has been recycled since the 1950s. So most of our recycling waste historically has been shipped overseas to China, until January of this year, when they made a strong stance on protecting their own environment and said, no more, we are not taking your waste. So now our waste is unfortunately going to be diverted to countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, and India, areas of the world that have very different waste management systems than we do here, and we're not even doing a good job with our own recycling. So we need to stem the production of more plastic, because it cannot be absorbed by recycling. It's a false sense of security.
Well, and on that note, of course, that's within the American kind of mindset, if you will. But on that note, we asked our community, should we ban single-use plastics? And we got some interesting responses. Laurent, I want to put one of them to you. Vijesh D'Souza saying, absolutely, people's addiction to plastic must be cut by banning single-use ones and bring in alternate eco-friendly products. In India, for example, you get to see plastic littered everywhere. Our cities are turning into waste heaps with no effective planning of recycling. This needs to stop. Laurent, no one's going to argue that this shouldn't stop, but how much damage have we done collectively? I mean, are we at a point of no return?
Well, I think, we're probably going to find plastic in the ocean forever, whether it's in fibers and microplastics and so on. So I don't think there's any turning back from that. Now, that doesn't mean that, we cannot try to divert the curve and basically diverting use of single-use plastics and reducing and trying to find alternatives to, use of plastic is definitely, one way to go, of course.
And Marcus, what do you think of all this? I mean, especially with the attention that's been put on the Great Pacific Garbage Patch. I know there's been a lot of attention put on that. Is this just the tip of the iceberg then?
Yes, of course. I think if you look at what's in the oceans, that was a great place for us to sort of get the world paying attention to it. But all the solutions are happening up on land. The middle of the ocean is the epitome of the tragedy of the commons. You can't point to a country and you can't point to a company in the middle of nowhere. But if you go up on land, you begin to identify the product types, but also the brands. So you've got a country that's on their beaches and their rivers, on their streets, and then you've also got brand associations. And that's where we're seeing change happen. One great example was when we discovered microbeads in the Great Lakes. Very quickly, we pointed to U.S. policy and companies like Johnson & Johnson, Procter & Gamble that make microbeads. And within a couple of years, we had Obama signing, federal legislation. So I think, although it's a tip of the iceberg, you're seeing more and more organizations, for example, the Break Free from Plastic movement, well over 1,000 organizations who are asking the same things. We want the brands. If we're going to, harp on recycling all the time, you've got to have upstream design for recycling. And if we did that, you'd likely end up with none of these single-use throwaway plastics in society any longer.
Well, and on that point, I mean, that's a great point that you bring up. Looking at this tweet, there's a tweet here from McDonald's UK News that came out today. We're pleased to announce that from May, we'll be trialing paper straws in restaurants and moving our recyclable plastic straws behind the counter. Is this enough? I mean, I guess I'm not trying to be a cynic here, but we have a tweet from Binstrap, kind of outlining something that came up in our meetings. Before we went live on air, we were talking about, well, how do we actually solve this kind of protracted problem, especially with what you brought up, Marcus? And it occurred to me, what about stopping production of plastic? I know that seems naive, but Binstrap saying we need to stop plastic pollution at the source of the problem. If we don't stop all this plastic entering the environment, rivers and oceans, we will never stop taking it back out. It's the cart before the horse situation. Shilpi, what do you make of that?
This is exactly what Break Free from Plastic is all about. We're about source reduction now because there is too much plastic in the system. And we are unique as a movement when you compare it to individual organizations or even coalitions, because we are working at all points in the system, like I mentioned before, so from extraction to disposal. And we do this by addressing root causes rather than cleanups and end-of-pipe measures, and campaign for systemic change around the world. And we're certainly going after the industry and corporations to hold them accountable. In fact, we have a campaign going on right now targeting Starbucks because they have still not been able to give us a 100% recyclable cup. And they are sending 4 billion plastic-lined cups to our landfills and waterways each year. You can follow along on Starbucks Trash, hashtag Starbucks Trash if you're interested.
Isabel?
Yeah.
Isabel, can you hear me?
Hi.
All right. You can hear me. Fantastic. I don't know if you were able to hear what was just going on.
The connection just glitched out.
No worries. So, what I wanted to ask you, there was a video that went viral recently of a tourist that was scuba diving, I believe, in Bali. And it's kind of, I hope we can play it for our audience because, Bali's been in the news a lot. And when we saw this video, it's really alarming. I think for people who don't think about this, you see this video and it's quite shocking. So Isabel, I want to ask you, based on this video, based on your life, this is happening where you live. Is this what inspired you to start the Bye Bye Bag campaign in Bali?
Yeah, definitely. Being aware of what was happening to the environment around us as 10 and 12-year-olds, which was the age me and my sister were when we founded Bye Bye Plastic Bags. But looking around, seeing this in our everyday lives, it's not rocket science to see that plastic is an issue. But I think what also really gave us this final push to start is a lesson in class we had about change makers and world leaders. And that opened up the question, what can we do as kids on the island of Bali? How can we make a difference? And so we started doing all this research and, brainstorming. I still remember we had all the papers out on the bench. And we were just thinking, all the different issues Bali was facing. And there were quite a few. But I think the one that connected back to me and Malati so much was the garbage issue, just because it affected your everyday lives, right? Here in Bali, it's so in your face. Whether you're walking or swimming, plastic is constantly surrounding you. So yeah, that video is a very, real representation of what is, happening in Bali. But I think something that I also want to add to that video that is maybe not added in the published version that went viral is that there are a lot of efforts on Bali to tackle this issue, right? And it's not only Bye Bye Plastic Bags, but there are easily like 50 organizations all working together in Bali to tackle this garbage issue. So that's something I also wanted to highlight, that, we're not all sitting back and just watching Bali, being destroyed.
Well, I'm glad that you did, and I don't know what our other guests make of your initiative. Not to suggest that it's not important. Of course it is, and I you used the word real representation. I hope you're a real representation of the next generation, how people are going to take matters into their own hands. But Laurent, what do you make of not just that initiative, but where is the solution? Obviously it seems like it's going to have to be compounded with a few different efforts, but what's the most important?
Well, I think, really what the most important is to combine, absolutely agree with, what the guys said before. It's about, working all together to try and find solution. And there's 2 points is 1, closing the tap, stopping plastic to enter the ocean, and 2, clean up the mess, right? And I think that's how we're going to solve that issue. But that's going to require a lot of effort from everyone, working together, from citizen to corporation to governments to NGOs, everyone, we're all facing the same problem. And yeah, it's for us to do it, I guess.
So Laurent, what is your group doing specifically to clean up the ocean?
So the Ocean Cleanup Foundation is looking at technologies basically to try to remove plastic from the ocean rather than removing it from the coastline on the beaches. And so, going back to basically the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, I mean, one of basically the issue that, one of the results we bring in the study is that, okay, most of it is made of microplastics if you talk about the number of pieces, right? But if you talk about the available material that is currently in the water, most of it is actually large debris, right? And all this large debris, that's, 92% of 80,000 tons, you make the math, is just basically slowly degrading into microplastics, right? So basically the willing behind that is to go out there and try to clean that up, as soon as possible. Obviously, this has to be combined with source reduction initiatives and policies, so then we don't end up like cleaning up forever, right? And yeah.
And, I have to ask, it seems like, you made the distinction between what, Isabel's doing in terms of the coastlines. You're focusing, obviously, on the oceans, and that's how you collected all your data. But because this is an interactive show, I'm going to try to come to the tweet that we just got. If you bear with me, this just came in from Khaled Diab, presumably listening to everything we've been discussing, saying, though, by the time an initiative is rolled out to reduce one kind of plastic waste, the economy has created half a dozen new ones to contend with. It's like a tsunami of plastic. Laurent, I see that you're kind of smiling and nodding. I'd love to hear from you what you make of that, and then I'll come to you, Marcus. Laurent?
No, but that just shows, the huge challenge that we have in front of us, because, I mean, if you look at forecasts for like plastic production over the next decade, like, I mean, we're running into trouble there, right? And so I think really like the time to act is now in terms of, implementing policies and having international cooperation and really like, work towards like, concrete solutions, basically.
Well, you've got.
I'll just
Marcus,
add one more.
Okay, go ahead. We'll go to Marcus, then you can come back in. Guys, remember, ladies, gentlemen, feel free to jump in, right? Okay, now that I said that, of course, no one's going to jump in. But let's hear from you, Marcus. Let's go. Come on.
I'll dive right in. I think that where we're seeing the world go in the direction of is a circular economy. You see many organizations now are talking about, the old adage that, you can make something, throw it away, when there is no place. Any trash we make is going to land in someone's backyard with all kinds of social justice implications, or in someone's environment where it has ecological damage. So circular economies are happening, but all this work is happening on land. While I agree with Laurent that cleanup in the middle of the ocean is a good thing for the fishing gear, because most of what they found, and their report is spot on, was by far fishing gear. I think 46% nets, and the rest was predominantly fishing buoys, fishing floats, and so forth. So addressing the fishing industry and doing cleanup on that stuff is very important. But the vast majority of the work being done to solve the issue is on land, building circular economies and responsibility for all the negative externalities, harm to people and the planet.
Shilpi, does that ring true?
Yeah, I completely agree with Marcus. And I think, going back to what Isabel was saying on people in Bali are not just sitting by and watching their oceans fill up with garbage. I think there's a lot of blame happening towards communities in Southeast Asia. And I think it's important we also understand there's a lot of innovation coming out of these areas. So we have positive live examples of zero waste communities in cities happening in the Philippines and Indonesia and India. Zero waste, for those of you that don't know, is a direction for cities to divert materials away from landfills and incinerators and to maximize opportunities for compost, recycling, and reuse. So it's all about conserving resources and empowering the community. And I do have a tangible example. San Fernando in the Philippines manages to divert 70% of their waste from the landfill with no incineration. And actually, it's illegal in the Philippines to incinerate.
Well, if you don't mind, I don't want to cut you off. I know Isabel is trying to get in there. I told you guys to jump in there, so we'll hear from her. Go ahead. What did you want to say? I think she might have wanted to add to your point. Isabel?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to add to those points because, living in Indonesia, the second largest contributor to plastic pollution in the oceans, of course, saying no to plastic bags isn't the final solution, and we definitely understand that through our 5 years of campaigning. But realistically, you have to start somewhere, right? And going back to the question before, whether recycling was the final issue, here in Bali, we don't have a proper waste management system to even provide recycling to the general public. So what we're trying to do a lot is change the mindset, through education, because of course, saying no to plastic bags, that's just the first step. And like you guys were all saying, it really rolls out in 2 steps, which is, the prevention of plastic, but then also cleaning it up all around the world. Plastic that's already out there in the oceans, on land. Yeah, it's just a point that I wanted to say is that, even the smallest actions may not have the biggest effect, but you do have to start somewhere.
No, I definitely agree
so
that that's the right
all
attitude.
The people watching out there, yeah.
And that's the right attitude to have. You're right to bring that up, and I saw that the gentlemen on the program were agreeing with you, and I would imagine Shilpi as well. Because you brought this up, and we're talking about Indonesia and how serious the problem is and what the solutions might be, I want to share a video comment that came in from Tiza Mafira. Take a listen to this. She's the executive director of the Indonesia Plastic Bag Diet Movement. Take a listen.
Plastic is a huge problem in Jakarta. It takes up the bulk of landfill space. It clogs up waterways and rivers and directly contributes to the flooding that Jakarta often experiences. And it's still handed out for free. We've pushed for a plastic bag charge trial to be enacted nationwide in 2016. It was successful in reducing the amount of plastic bag use by 55% during the trial. And it directly led to one city in Indonesia called Banjarmasin to completely ban plastic bags.
So Isabel, is plastics recycling enough to do this? And what do you make of her comment quickly?
Well, definitely, I believe that Bali needs to put in place some sort of waste management system, whether that be recycling, compost, even waste pickup services. But slowly you do see that the government is trying to implement different changes. And just quickly, if I can add on to that, Indonesia's government committed to reduce their plastic waste by 70% by 2025. Right? And if we look at that, that's only 7 years away. And today we see them, having lots of meetings about different action plans, but whether the action is going to follow through after that, is still a question.
Of course, and there are many. Go ahead, Marcus. Go ahead. Let's hear from Marcus.
Yeah.
So I'm glad Isabel was saying all these things. And the reason why Indonesia is in the hot seat is because about 2 years ago, there was a paper by Jenna Jambek that pointed to the top 20 countries. And then Laurent Le Breton, he published a paper, the top 20 rivers. The latest research is now, it's not in the middle of the oceans, it's focused on looking at that land-to-sea connection, and it's calling out countries. I can tell you we had the 6th International Marinery Conference 2 weeks ago, the biggest conference on this issue. And the first session, the first day, the first keynote was the Ministry of the Environment from Indonesia. So the research now is putting countries in the hot seat. Yeah. We need the same kind of attention toward brands. So when you showed McDonald's committing to paper straws, I think that's great. But when they say they're going to recycle plastic straws, I wonder, really? Who's going to do that? Who's going to collect those straws and turn them back into straws?
Yes, and obviously
there's need for more engagement.
And obviously engagement, behavior, all very important things. I do want to draw our attention because, Shilpi, you brought up India before we wrap. We got this tweet saying, because for those of you who don't know, Maharashtra, which is a region there, passed a ban this year on single-use plastic items like plastic bags, utensils, containers. Namrata Singh says, I think it was a long-awaited announcement. The government had shared their intention months ago. Those who chose to pay heed have been exploring alternatives through many individuals, communities, and even shops are still choosing to ignore it, but the ban is here. It is real, just like this conversation was quite real. There's so much to discuss, but we did run out of time for this conversation, but at the stream, as you may know, for the diehard viewers, the conversation always continues. So I want to thank you all, Laurent, Isabel, Marcus, Shilpi, for sharing your expertise. I love it when some of the guests agree, especially, to hear, how old are you, Isabel? 15? 15 years old.
15, yeah.
And everyone was nodding. Not to patronize you, but it is inspiring. So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. Remember, you can always leave your comments, questions at stream.aljazeera.com.